G'day everyone. Today I've got a couple of stories to talk to you about, a couple of tragedies actually. One of them's a US Navy helicopter that crashed in the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, and first I'm going to talk to you about Gulf Air 771, a Boeing 737 from Karachi to Abu Dhabi. And this is a photograph of the very aircraft that crashed about a month before the incident took place, taken by Richard van der Voorde. Anyway, so the aircraft was en route from Karachi to Abu Dhabi with 107 passengers and 5 crew, and the normal route for the aircraft would be to come from Karachi into Bahrain's airspace, as you can see at this position, Jawani, where Karachi would transfer the aircraft to my control, and then the aircraft would fly along that airway, Amber 1, towards Sharjah, and then from Sharjah down towards Abu Dhabi. I normally transferred or released the aircraft to Dubai approach around just after Atnis, usually when it was leaving, if there was no other traffic, when they started descent. And the controller at Dubai, who subsequently came to Bahrain and I became good friends with, Stuart, said that he had no traffic, so he sent it direct to Abu Dhabi. And the little star there, the little red star, indicates the position of the crash. And he said that the aircraft made 2 orbits after the explosion before it dropped out of radar cover and crashed about 5 miles, about 8 kilometers east of Jebel Ali. So the telephone rang. Also, I should say that Stuart told me that he had transferred the aircraft to Abu Dhabi's frequency because he had no traffic, and the aircraft was talking to Abu Dhabi at the time of the crash. Abu Dhabi rang me and told me that Gulf Air 771 had transmitted a mayday, and they were not in contact with it, and they believed it had crashed. There was a lot of noise, pandemonium in the background of the call, not the usual quiet, calm, professional operations room that you'd expect in an air traffic control unit. The controller obviously was very stressed and trying to get to grips with what was happening, trying to understand what he could do, how he could help to organise assistance, who he could talk to get search and rescue. And although Bahrain was the rescue coordination centre for the airspace, there wasn't much that, and I was the supervisor on duty, there wasn't much that I could do about it because he wasn't on my frequency at the time. He was crashed nearer to Dubai actually than Abu Dhabi, but he was on Abu Dhabi's frequency, so I was leaving it to Abu Dhabi and Dubai to organise a search and rescue. All I did was to impound the flight progress strips because that sector was a procedural sector at the time. There was no radar, so we controlled the traffic using pieces of paper. So I made sure that the pieces of paper, the strips, were impounded, and I asked the telecommunications engineer to impound the RT tapes, the radio telephony tapes of the transmissions that we had made between us when he came into my airspace. I had a friend who was an aircraft engineer who worked for Gulf Air, and after the event he told me that he had been called at very short notice to get out to the airport immediately, where there was a Gulf Air 737 waiting on the apron. And he said they sat there for a couple of hours, and I presume they were waiting to find out whether to go to Dubai or whether to go to Abu Dhabi. But eventually they flew to Abu Dhabi, where buses took them to the crash site. And the idea was that these people would secure the crash site and recover the smaller pieces that were already being covered by sand being blown over the crash site. There were also people at the crash site who were picking around for souvenirs of the aircraft. And actually this is not unheard of at crash sites. In fact, I remember distinctly some years before, I can't tell you when exactly, it was probably about 1971 or 72, a British Airways Hawke City Trident took off from Heathrow, and about 90 seconds after departure, the captain retracted the leading edge flaps, the aircraft stalled and crashed in a field between the A30 main road and Staines town, and people who were on the road saw the crash and parked, and presumably some of them went over there to see if they could help. I'm sure a lot more of them were just standing watching, but the distressing thing about that crash was that the aircraft landed in a very flat attitude, in fact even nose up I think, and the first responders, the ambulances, the paramedics couldn't get to the site because of the traffic jam of the people parked on the main road. So these things happen. So what about the causes of this accident? Well, at the time, obviously we didn't know, and even for some years afterwards, I wasn't sure what had caused the accident. There was talk that it might have been another aircraft, a military aircraft, had shot it down. That was because there was a Gulf Cooperation Council military exercise in progress during that week. This was a Thursday night, so during the week. And so there were two pieces of airspace which were significant. One was Delta 24, a danger area, which was activated from ground to 25,000 feet above ground level by NOTAM. So the controlling authority for this airspace was Dubai, so they would have known if the airspace was active. But I can't tell you what sort of activity it normally contained. And then the other one was Romeo 53, a restricted area from ground to unlimited, active 03 to 0900 daily, except Fridays. And so this piece of airspace was not active. And I seem to recall that it was used for air-to-air firing, but anyway, whether it was or whether it wasn't active. As the next day was Friday, the Emirates Air Force, like I presume most air forces in the world, don't fly on the weekends. Friday night in non-Muslim countries and Thursday night in Muslim countries was the night before the weekend. So here you see a scan of the Gulf Daily News from Wednesday, the 23rd of September 1987. So this was the 4th anniversary of the day the aircraft crashed. And the text might be a bit small for you to read. So what I'm going to do is read what it says in the newspaper. And the headline is, "Bomb caused airliner crash, parents told." A time bomb caused the Gulf Air jet disaster that killed all 111 people on board 4 years ago today, a British politician has revealed. Okay, there's 112 on board actually. Sir Dudley Smith's revelations have lifted the mystery surrounding Gulf Air 771, which plunged into the desert en route from Pakistan to Abu Dhabi on September 23, 1983. The MP was privy to a copy of the 400-page document from the American National Transport Safety Board, whose experts investigated the 737 disaster. The report, which has never been released publicly in the Gulf, details the last moment in the cockpit, including description of the Omani captain praying seconds before the plane nosedived into the sand 20 miles from Abu Dhabi. The conclusion of the document, which Sir Dudley obtained through the British Foreign Office, reads as follows: "In our view, the cause of the crash was undoubtedly a time bomb." The investigators based their findings on several factors. 1. The aircraft black box voice recorder. 2. A missing passenger who never boarded on takeoff from Karachi. 3. The type of injuries to passengers sitting near the baggage hold where the bomb is thought to have been placed. And 4. A sudden enormous interruption to an otherwise normal flight which would tie in with a time bomb on board. And it continues. The report added that Captain Saud al-Kindi and his Bahraini co-pilot Khazal al-Qadi struggled to save the stricken jet before it crashed with tremendous force into the ground. "The investigation made very grim reading," said Sir Dudley, whose interest in the report followed a plea from British parents of one of the 5 crew members on board who wanted to know how their daughter died. Also, another British stewardess was on board, and the steward was a Bahraini, Hashim Saeed Abdullah. Sir Dudley said, "From the evidence in the report, there is no doubt in my mind that it was a bomb, probably in the luggage hold." The mystery of the missing passenger was also examined by the NTSB, which gave details of a delay in the Gulf Air flight at Karachi Airport. "The plane was forced to wait because it was 1 passenger short," said Sir Dudley, but the report did not give the names of any groups or reasons why a bomb would be placed on board. Pakistan police are believed to have drawn a blank on the first-class traveller who checked in at the Gulf Air counter with luggage, but later disappeared without boarding the aircraft and without leaving an address or contact phone number. "All these factors pointed to evidence of a bomb," said the Warwickshire politician. He said the report's evidence made it clear that neither pilot error nor stray missile had caused the crash. The flight had been perfectly normal. Voice transcripts showed the crew chatting amongst themselves. One asked the other if he was on duty the next day. He replied, "No, I've got a day off tomorrow." Then suddenly there was a tremendous interruption. It gave an indication that something drastic had happened. The discussion between the pilots showed they were trying like mad to control the aircraft. Behind the cockpit, many of the passengers, mainly Pakistanis returning to Abu Dhabi and Bahrain from summer vacation, had already been asphyxiated. A death certificate confirmed this as the cause of death. The time bomb revelation backed the suspicions of the families of the 2 stewardesses on board the fatal flight. Mrs. Gwen Farthing of Warwickshire, England, whose daughter Lynn died in the crash, contacted Sir Dudley for information and consequently also saw the report. "I always suspected it was a bomb," she said. "Now I know it was definitely sabotage." And Mrs. Enid Townsend of Peterborough, England, who lost daughter Sally Ann, said, "This won't bring my daughter back, but we were also given to believe that there had been a bomb." Both families have received compensation from the airline for the loss of their daughters, running into thousands of pounds. Earlier this week, Abu Dhabi airport officials, contacted by the Gulf Daily News about the accident, said they were unable to release details. "We're waiting for information from Gulf Air. It's got to do with compensation for the families," said the Undersecretary for Financial, Administrative and Civil Aviation Affairs at the Ministry of Communication, Mohammed Yahil Al-Suwaiti. "The cause of the crash was not sabotage. To our good judgment, it was a natural catastrophe," he said. Gulf Air in Bahrain, when contacted by the Gulf Daily News, refused to comment. This was the first time that I had heard of a passenger checking in and not boarding the flight, but sadly it happened again 5 years later, on the 21st of December 1988, and you can see this photograph here of the Pan American World Airways 747-11103 that blew up and crashed on Lockerbie, Scotland. And on this flight as well, it was believed that a passenger checked in baggage but didn't board the flight. So it's sad that the tragedy of Gulf Air 771, nobody seemed to learn the lessons from it at the time. I mean, everybody's aware of the changes to security at airports that were ramped up enormously after the Pan Am Clipper 103 flight. But, and now of course, and after that point, aircraft never departed without all the passengers on board. And as I say, it's a shame that the lesson wasn't learned, because it might have averted the Clipper 103 disaster. Now I move on to Angel 740, the US Navy Sikorsky UH-3H Sea King that crashed on Thursday the 30th of July 1987. So this fantastic picture of the Sea King, actually that is an island, one of the Bahrain islands, a little one out to the northeast of Bahrain. This is of Angel 746, but the aircraft in question that we're talking about today, the one that crashed, was called Angel 740, and you can see on the sponson there it says Desert Ducks, and in actual fact the nickname for Angel 740 was the Desert Duck. These aircraft come from the US Navy Helicopter Combat Support Squadron, HC-2, based at Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia, United States. And they're dubbed the Fleet Angels, hence the call sign Angel 740. They're used for logistics and communications, so they carry mail, passengers and urgent stores and equipment and stuff like that, for the flotilla of US warships that were in the Gulf at the time because of the Iran-Iraq war. And I'll be doing another YouTube video about that, if I haven't already, about some of the incidents that took place during the Iran-Iraq war, which we call the Gulf War, because there hadn't been a Gulf War before the Gulf War, so it was the Gulf War. And so these aircraft were based in Bahrain, or this particular aircraft, 740, was based in Bahrain, and it was also, which was the home of the headquarters of the US forces in the Gulf at the time, and it was also based on the USS La Salle, which was called a Raleigh-class amphibious transport dock ship. And this ship had already got experience of international incidents in the region, because it was the command post of the US activity at the start of the Iranian hostage crisis, which would have been, it would have been about 1979, something like that. And it also had provided primary firefighting response and rescue to the USS Stark, which had been hit by 2 Iraqi Exocet missiles in May 1987, so only a few months before this. And I'll be doing a video about that because I was on duty that night as well. So this aircraft is Angel 741 on the deck of the USS La Salle in the evening. Coincidental, because the Angel 740 crashed in the evening towards the end of our afternoon shift. So we'd been on duty from 2:30 in the afternoon and went off at 10:30 in the evening. And being a Thursday night, the big intra-Gulf rush of traffic was taking place, with everybody trying to get to their destinations on Thursday evening before the Muslim weekend, which was Friday. As I said, I was the supervisor on duty, and I had a call from the tower saying that they had heard a ship, a US Navy ship calling on 344.0 megahertz, which was Bahrain's discrete UHF frequency, and the tower couldn't reply. Now, we had both UHF and VHF frequencies because we had to deal with both civil and military traffic. The UHF is used by military generally, and the civil aircraft use VHF. So I put on my headset and called on 344.0 from the approach radar position. Got no reply, so I gathered that I wasn't going out, the transmitter wasn't working. So I asked Jim, who was on the west radar next to me on the next console, to try on the frequency. He wasn't going out either. So I selected 121.5 megahertz, which is the civil emergency frequency throughout the world, and called the ship, USS Ship, this is Bahrain approach on 121.5, do you read? Over. And he replied, Bahrain approach, this is USS Ship, we have one helicopter, a Sierra Hotel 6 Bravo, inbound to your field with 2 casualties on board. One is ambulatory and the other requires an ambulance and doctor to meet him. Over. I replied, Roger, what's the expected time of arrival? And the call sign of the helicopter, and he said, ETA about 1 hour, stand by for the call sign. So I called the engineers to report that the 344.0 transmitter was US, and then I went next door to the next office, next door to the ops room, to the Civil Aviation Directorate liaison officer to report what had happened. Turns out he was already aware, because the US Navy had already advised him that they had an ambulance waiting on the Navy ramp on the West Apron in Bahrain. I went back to the ops room and started to work through the call list. I had a list of people to tell under such circumstances, and as always happened on Thursday evenings when these things happened, everybody was out partying. So I selected the checklist, aircraft crash not in Muharraq, Muharraq being the island, one of the Bahrain islands, and it was the island where the airport is. And so I pulled out that checklist and telephoned the Director of Civil Aviation, who was the most senior person who would need to know immediately about such an incident. He was on leave and I got no reply. So then I rang his brother, his deputy, who was the Undersecretary of State for Civil Aviation, got no reply. So I bleeped them both. So, those of you who are not familiar with technology from the dinosaur period, telephones used to be connected to a cable, copper cable, and you had a base with a handset connected with a wire and a dial on the front, and you could dial the numbers. In the late 70s, there became commonplace a small number keypad, touch-tone keypad, but still with a cable connected to the handset. Then in the early 80s, the radio telephone, if you like to call it that, so you had a base station that was connected to the cable and a handset that was battery powered with a wireless radio that could communicate, so you could walk around the house up to 30 meters, say 100 feet, something like that, and talk without being connected directly. Then in the late 80s, a thing called a bleeper came along. It made a bleeping noise, so that's probably why it's called a bleeper. And when you dialed the number of the bleeper, it would make the bleeper react, and it would show on the display, I had a little thing about this big, on the display it would show the telephone number that was calling, and some of them you could put a text message up on it, but I didn't know how to do the text message in those days on the bleepers. So anyway, go back to the story. I bleeped both the Director of Civil Aviation, the big boss, and his deputy, the Under Secretary of State. Then I rang the Director of Finance and Planning at the Civil Aviation Department. His number was engaged, so I thought I'll try him later. Then I rang the Senior Air Traffic Control Officer, got no reply, bleeped him. Then I rang the IAL General Manager. So the IAL General Manager was the man who was in charge of the contract for all of the people like me, expatriate controllers who worked for the company International Air Radio Limited, as it was then, now Serco. I explained the situation to him and said I thought the US Navy had things pretty much under control, particularly as they got the experience from the incident with the USS Start, which had happened only a few months before. And as I say, there'll be a YouTube video about that. The next organisation on the list was the Met Office. Didn't think they needed to know, so I didn't ring them. And the telecommunications engineer already knew, so that was the end of that list. I went back to the Director of Civil Aviation when he called me and I briefed him. He asked to be kept advised. I tried the Director of Finance and Planning again. He was still engaged. Then I rang the US Navy and was told that Angel 740 had crashed. The person I spoke to said that it had crashed near the ship and that there were 4 crew members and 5 passengers on board. At the same time, the liaison officer next door, in the office next door, was talking to someone else at the Navy who told him that the call sign of the SH-60 Casevac casualty evacuation helicopter would be Ocean Lord 23. And while this was all going on and I was busy making all these phone calls, the sectors were going crazy with Thursday evening traffic, but I was too busy to help them. So I tried the Director of Finance and Planning again, still engaged, so I bleeped him. The Under Secretary of State for Civil Aviation rang me. He told me that Angel 740 was approaching the USS La Salle from the stern to land, hit something and crashed. He asked for any news on the other people on board the helicopter, and I told him I would try to find out and call him back. So I rang another number at the US Navy that I had, spoke to an officer there. I asked him that a senior member of the government had asked me to try and find out what had happened to the other people on board the helicopter, and asked him if he was at liberty to divulge that information. He said no, he wasn't allowed to divulge that sort of thing until the commander of the ship gave him permission to release the information. So I said, well look, put it this way, will there be any more people coming to Bahrain requiring hospitalisation? And he said, I don't think so. So I asked him a few more questions and not too specific, he hedged around a bit, but I inferred from what he said that the remaining people on board the helicopter were either well and on the ship, or well enough to be treated on the ship, or else they were dead and had been brought to the ship or were still in the helicopter. So I bleeped the Under Secretary of State for Civil Aviation, and when he rang I briefed him. Eventually, the Director of Finance and Planning rang, a bit annoyed that I hadn't called him and that he'd had to find out from somebody else before I'd spoken to him. I didn't like to tell him that the Under Secretary of State for Civil Aviation had told me not to bother to ring him if I couldn't get hold of him. Went through the checklist, as I say, and the survivor, it turned out one survivor, was brought to shore in an aircraft like this, the Sikorsky SH-60 Seahawk. And about an hour after the first calls from the ship, the SH-60 Ocean Lord 23 had dropped the injured crew member off at the Navy ramp at the airport and was outbound from Bahrain back to the ship. So I rang the Under Secretary of State for Civil Aviation and then the Director of Finance and Planning and gave them an update. They told me that the SH-60 had only brought in one person for hospitalisation, but obviously the helicopter may have made another trip later after I went off watch, because the Gulf Daily News said there were 2 people in the hospital. And speaking of the Gulf Daily News, Here is the Saturday, the 1st of August edition. Readership in Bahrain of more than 45,000 a day. And it says 1 dead, 3 missing in US Navy disaster. Gulf search after helicopter crashes. Divers are searching the wreckage of a US Navy helicopter that crashed in the Gulf near Bahrain, killing 1 man and leaving 3 missing. 2 survivors were flown to Bahrain hospitals, so one of them must have come after I went off watch, after the Sea King plunged into the water after trying to land on the USS La Salle on a routine transport mission. 3 others were also rescued and are in a good condition. It's understood they remained on board the US ship. The helicopter crashed 15 miles, it was in fact 75 miles, about 140 kilometres, north of Bahrain, while attempting to land on the La Salle, the command ship of the Mideast Task Force. It was ferrying equipment and personnel when the incident occurred, Pentagon sources said. Officials have confirmed the Sea King was not attacked. Survivor, Lieutenant Commander Walter Fitzpatrick, said from his hospital bed at the Bahrain Defence Force Hospital, "I'm pretty sure we hit the side of the ship. We were getting low and I looked to see if I could see the flight deck beneath us. When I couldn't, I knew we were too low." Fitzpatrick, 35, suffered a fractured shoulder and was plucked from the sea by a recovery unit from the guided missile destroyer USS Kidd, which was near the La Salle. "We hit and I had an impression we'd broken up and there might have been an explosion," he said. "From the corner of my eye I saw flames leaping. Then I was underneath fighting to get to the surface." Another victim, Adrian Gunnison, is in a critical but stable condition at Salmania Hospital. He was flown to Bahrain unconscious at 10:30 p.m. and as I say, we went off watch at 10:30 p.m. so I may have already been relieved at that point. So he was flown at 10:30 p.m. Thursday after swallowing seawater and jet fuel. He's now on a respirator in the intensive care unit, but a hospital spokesman said he's out of danger and improving. He's regained consciousness and is being kept under sedation. The spokesman for the hospital denied that the body of a dead sailor was being kept at Salmania morgue. The Navy is still continuing its search for the missing men, said the Pentagon, but their identities have not been revealed. Next day, Friday the 31st of July 1987, I was on another afternoon shift, and I was told when I arrived that apparently the British Major, who is in day-to-day command of the Bahrain Defence Force SIS, which I think stands for Security Intelligence Service, which is an equivalent of, let's say, the Special Air Service MI5 and MI6 all rolled into one, had been into the ops room that morning to find out why the SIS had not been told about the Angel crash. And he said that the colonel, commanding officer of the SIS, had been very disappointed that he had to find out from someone else at a majlis, which is an audience, at the Amir's palace. And I thought to myself, well, if he wants to know about aircraft crashes, then he'd better get himself on the aircraft crash call-out list. So that completes my presentation on the tragic loss of Gulf Air 771, 737, with 112 people on board, and the Angel 740. I haven't discovered the actual number of people who died in that crash, so I can't give you that information. But anyway, I hope you found these 2 stories interesting, and if you're researching them, that the information was useful, and I look forward to the next video. See you later. Bye-bye.